My name is Christian Molman, and in this talk I'm going to go over some of the basics of getting started with Blender for people who are familiar with other 3D software but haven't used Blender before. I'm not going to cover everything, but I will go over some of the first things you need to know and a few common pitfalls that may be confusing or annoying coming from Maya or 3ds Max. You've probably already downloaded and installed Blender, but if not, you can find it here. So when you first start Blender, the splash screen is going to have some special options, like the language or whether you want to select with left or right click. Also an option for which hotkey preset you want to use. Do you want to go with Blender defaults, or do you want to use the older 2.7 settings, or do you want to use the industry compatible setting, which is a keymap that tries to replicate something somewhere in between Max and Maya, which has some interesting qualities, but we're going to talk about that later. For now, we're going to pick the default Blender settings. So when you click Save on the first time setup, it'll take you to the regular splash screen. Here you can pick different templates for new scenes. You can open an existing scene. You can recover a last session. You can go to the manual, the official website, and if you click anywhere, it'll take you to the default scene. Alright, so one thing we're going to do is look at some of the defaults for camera manipulation and basic transforms. This is probably one of the first things you're going to want to change if you want to make Blender work a little bit more like you're used to in Maya or 3ds Max. By default, you can rotate the camera with middle mouse button, you can pan with shift middle mouse, and you can zoom with control middle mouse. One thing that's a little bit different than you might be used to is the defaults for move, rotate, and scale. So by default, you press G to move an object, and then you click to place it. You press R to rotate, again click to confirm, and S to scale. These are the default buttons for move, rotate, and scale throughout Blender. Now you might notice this feels a little imprecise. There are some ways to mitigate this, like for example you can lock to different axes by pressing X, Y, or Z to constrain it to that axis. However, it's still just kind of an odd way of doing things. Luckily though, there's an alternative. You can use this toolbar over here, which has a move tool, a rotate tool, and a scale tool, all of which have nice gizmos with axes that you can use for precise moving on just that axis. You can also use these to move on two axes at the same time, and these, and you can use this to move in screen space. Same thing for rotation. You can use this for rotating on the different axes, this in screen space, and you can use the scale tool like so. Alright, so at this point you might be thinking, okay, that's nice, but I kind of want to use these tools instead of the default, GRS things. Okay, so to do that, we go into Edit, Preferences, and then down to Keymap, and here you can find all the options for changing any hotkeys you want. So just like the splash screen, you have a few options here for modifying the default keymap. If you minimize this, you can see here all the different categories for hotkeys. So for example, window has a bunch of hotkeys here, screen global, all kinds of subcategories. And you can change all of these if you want to. However, if you want to quickly change your hotkeys, the easiest way is to pick a different keymap preset from here. Okay, so this keymap is interesting because it combines hotkeys from Maya and 3ds Max and other software to create something that might be a little more similar to what you might be used to. So for example, it has alt camera and query transforms. Unfortunately, one of the drawbacks of this keymap is that it changes so many keys that it becomes very hard to follow tutorials, because all tutorials will use the Blender defaults. So in my opinion, the ideal key map is something in between Blender defaults and the industry compatible key map, so that you don't have to relearn muscle memory as much, but you can still follow tutorials because most of the keys are still the same. So to that end, I created this custom key map, which you can download from here. And you can install it by going to Import, finding the right folder, and picking the .py file and opening it like so. And now the custom key map will appear in your list of hotkeys. So now we can use Alt to rotate the camera, and Alt middle mouse to pan, and Alt right mouse to zoom, just like in Maya. We can press Q to select, we can press W to move, we can press E to rotate, and R to scale, just like you would in Max or Maya. So maybe you want to create your own key map, and you can definitely do that. However, it's kind of a hassle. For example, because you have to change things for every mode. Okay, so what if you want to create your own key map anyway? Well, the first thing you want to do is start with the default set and then press the plus icon here, and it'll create a new key map based on the currently selected one. If you want to figure out how to get the Python commands and the settings for different specific hotkeys that you like in, for example, the industry compatible key map, look at how it's configured its hotkeys. You can add a new key anywhere by pressing Add New. Okay, so let's leave this for now and create a new scene, and then pick from any of these templates. Let's go with General, and then save changes before closing. Now, as you may notice, we're still seeing the exact same scene as we saw before. A cube, a camera, and a light. Now, this is the default Blender scene, and we can obviously, of course, we can delete this object if we want to get rid of it. We can delete the camera as well, and the light. Now we can work with this empty scene. So what if we create another new scene? It'll just do the same thing again. What if we want to change this? What if we just want the default scene to be an empty scene? All right, so let's delete these objects, and then we go to File, Defaults, Save Startup File. Now you might think we just saved that setting, but you would be wrong. Okay, let's try that one more time. File, Defaults, Save Startup File. So the thing you want to be careful with is, as soon as you move the mouse away, it disappears without confirming. So let's do that again. Okay, click. Now it's saved. So now if we do a bunch of stuff here, we go over here, whatever, File, New, General, and now it's the scene we saved. So let's do a quick overview of the interface. Over here you have the toolbar, which we already looked at with the Move, Rotate, and Scale tools. And you can show or hide this toolbar with T. Or you can, if it's not there, you can also activate it by pressing the little arrow key over here. Let's add an object real quick, a mesh and a sphere. And maybe add another cube and a cylinder. On the right, there's another panel, which you can also open with the arrow, and you can toggle this one with the N key. The end panel is basically the channel box. You can use it to change transform values, rotation and position and scale. You can also change multiple values at once by click dragging and then entering a value. You can also lock different axes. So for example, now you can only move on this axis. The drag selecting also works for this. So you can select these all at once. And you can also change the rotation order over here. You can change it to quaternions or Eulers. There's a few different panels. These are some options for tools, for the view. And this is also where you'll find any add-ons that you've installed. So for example, this is the add-on that lets me broadcast keys. So if we close this, over here you can see the view widget, which you can use to easily change the view to specific angles. So for example, if you click here, it goes to the right view, or here it goes to the back view, the top view, and you can also click again on the same spot to get the reverse angle. You can also click and drag in the circle to rotate the view. There's also these icons over here for when you're on a laptop and you don't have a middle mouse button available. So you can use this to zoom, you can use this to pan, and this to toggle the camera view, although right now there's no camera, and this to toggle orthographic. So on the right there is the outliner, which can be used to sort and find objects. You can select them like this. You can hide them, and you can also change the hierarchy by click and dragging. So here it says shift to parent, so now we've parented the sphere to the cylinder. And we can also undo this like so. You can also create collections, which are kind of like layers. You can, for example, move these objects to this collection here, and now we can toggle the visibility of this collection or this one. Now, as you can see, you can only actually change the visibility of things here. But what if you want to toggle the selectability? You want to lock selection. So to do that, you have to actually add that option in this filter menu. So you go to restriction toggles, and here you can see selectable. If we click to add this, now we go here, and here is the option to toggle selectability. So now, if we click on this, I can no longer select the cube. And same for collections. Now I can still select the cube, but I cannot select this entire collection. Okay, so while we're here, something that's also useful to know is the display modes over here. You can go to wireframe, shaded, materials, or rendered, which is usually the cycles engine and is currently all in shadow because there's no lights. There's also some overlays over here which are pretty handy. For example, you can configure all kinds of things about the view. So for example, you can add wireframe on top of any other mode. You can toggle whether you want to see different axes, whether you want to see the grid, text info, 3D cursor, etc. So something that's pretty useful is you can create multiple views very easily by right-clicking on the edge of any view and choosing vertical split or horizontal split. And then it creates this dividing line, and you click to confirm, and then you have two views. And you can do this again here and say horizontal split and click to confirm. And these are all distinct separate views with their own panels and everything. And you can change the view like so. Maybe you can also hide the header if you want, so it's a little more clean. And you can bring it back like this by clicking the little arrow key over here. And the interesting thing is, you can take any of these views and you can change it to a different tool. So for example, we can make this view over here, we can make it the image editor, or we can make this the dope sheet, or the graph editor. And we can always change it back to the 3D viewport by clicking here. You can join the views again by right-clicking and clicking Join Areas, and then you choose which one you want to merge into which one. Same thing here, you can right-click and say Join Areas, and then we want to merge this one into this, and we're back here. There's another way of doing this that's quicker but more confusing. You can go to the corner of any view and you can click and drag, and then it will create a new view like so. And then when you let go, it creates the view. And same thing here, we can go to this corner over here, and when we drag up, it creates this view. Now this is kind of handy because it's quick, but it's also very easy to mess this up. For example, let's say we want to get rid of this view. Oh wait, actually I didn't mean to, crap, I don't know, that's not what I wanted to do. So what if this happens and you're like, oh no, I've made a terrible mistake, I wanna undo this. So okay, what you do is you click the corner and you drag into the opposite window to merge it. And you may notice also I can't actually merge this one into this one because they don't match. So we merge this one into this one into this one, merge this one, and now I can merge these two. And there you go. So you may have noticed this little red and white crosshair thing over here. This is the 3D cursor. It's mainly used for things like snapping and pivots. And the 3D cursor is also where any new objects are created. You can move the cursor by pressing Shift, right-click anywhere. Or you can use the cursor tool over here and just left-click. So for example, I could snap this sphere to the cursor by going to Shift S, and then you see the snapping pie menu, and you can say selection to cursor, and then the sphere is over here. Or I could select the cylinder over here, and then I could say let's do cursor to selected, and now the cursor is over here. Or I can go to cursor to world origin, and then it's back at 0, 0. You can also use the 3D cursor as a pivot point by going here to the transform pivot point menu and selecting 3D cursor. Now if I select rotate on this cylinder, it will rotate from the 3D cursor. And if I go back and put this on individual origins, it will just rotate from its own pivot point. One thing to be aware of is that Blender works in modes, and you can change the mode by going to the menu over here, and here you can see we're in the default object mode, and you can go to edit mode like this, where you can change components like vertices. You can go to sculpt mode, although right now, because there's no mesh density, we can't really do much. We can go to weight paint, and we can go back to object mode. You can also toggle between object and edit mode by pressing tab to quickly go back and forth, which is really handy. And you can select your mode also by holding Control tab, and then you get the pie menu for all the different modes for the current selection. So we just looked at object modes, and when animating simple objects like this, you can set keyframes in this mode. Okay, so let's go here into the channel box and set a keyframe here for movement, and then let's enable auto key and go here on the timeline, and then just move this up here. And you can see it's set a key over here, and let's take this one, copy it, and put it over here. Paste. So now we've got a quick, simple animation. Okay, so if we want to animate a rigged character, it's a little more complicated. So let's go into add and add an armature. Now this is basically the container object for the skeleton. In this mode, in object mode, we can't actually animate it, we can't actually build the skeleton itself. To do that, we have to go into edit mode. And here we can actually edit and build the skeleton. So for example, we can subdivide this, we can extrude more bones, or we can delete them. Pretty much this is where you construct the actual skeleton. So okay, so let's say we're happy with this as it is, or maybe we'll add one more subdivision here, and then we say, okay, well, go back to object mode, but we still can't actually animate these bones in this mode. Well, what you have to do is go into pose mode over here, and here is the mode where you can actually animate individual bones. So, for example, like so. Okay, so to recap, object mode is where you create the armature that contains the skeleton, and this is also where you attach the armature to the mesh. Edit mode is where you construct the skeleton and set up all the hierarchy, and pose mode is where you actually set up the rig and create all the constraints and drivers and everything, and this is also where you animate. Or something that may be kind of confusing if you're new to Blender is the keying sets system. So normally, by default, if you want to animate an object, you would insert a key by pressing I, and then choosing from this menu which type of key you want to set. So for example, maybe I want to set just location keys, and maybe you want to set rotation as well, and scale. If you don't want to have to choose from this menu every time you set a key, what you need to do is go to keying sets over here and choose an active keying set. Now, there's a couple of options here, and I don't actually use most of these, but the ones you want to know about are available, which will set a key in whichever channel is already keyed. So for example, now, if we press I, it will set 9 keyframes for all the channels we've already keyed. So again, it will just set 9 keyframes for those channels. However, let's say we remove the keys for rotation. Now if I say I, it will only add 6 keyframes because it doesn't have any rotation keyframes. The problem though is that if you don't have any keys at all and you have available as the keying set and you press I, it will give you an error because there are no keyframes, so no channels have been keyed. There's nothing for it to reference. So one thing you could do is set location, rotation, and scale as your keying set, and then it will always just set all those 3 channels when pressing I. So if you don't want to have to set this every time you create a new scene, what you could do is create a new default scene that has this already set the way you want. Go to keying, set it to location, rotation, and scale, and then save startup file. Okay, and then now if we go to new scene, it's already got this setting. Okay, so we don't have time to go into depth on animation, but let's look at the dope sheet and graph editor real quick and a couple of things to be aware of. Remember that you can change any window to a dope sheet or graph editor by changing the editor type. So let's go to dope sheet here, and you can zoom like you could anywhere else. So one thing that you can do is you can switch very easily between the graph editor and the dope sheet like this, but you can also do this with Control Tab. You can switch instantly between the two. So one thing you want to do if you're using Blender 2.91 is you need to go into View and turn off Show Group Colors, because if you don't, your dope sheet and graph editor are going to look like this. As you can see, this is kind of unreadable, so we want to go into View and turn that off. However, in the latest version of Blender 2.92 and onwards, this option is in animation and it is now turned off by default, so you no longer have this problem. But if you're using an older version of Blender, it's something to be aware of. Okay, another tricky thing is that if you, by default, if you select a curve and try to select some keyframes, you will select keys from all the curves that are visible. So if you don't want to do this and only select from just the one curve, what you want to do is go into View and enable only selected curve keyframes. And now, as you can see, it's just selecting the current curve. Another thing you can do is press Shift H to hide everything except the selected curve, and Alt H to bring it back. So something else you might want to know how to do is how to make a play blast. When you can do that by going to View and then Viewport Render Animation in any viewport. However, this will actually use your render settings, and you might want to check that those are what you actually want. And you can find those over here. Here you might want to change your resolution, the aspect ratio, the frame range, frame rate over here, and possibly change the output folder. Also, you probably want to change the file format over here. This is PNG images. You might want to set this to MPEG video instead. And then you should be able to render something. Also, bear in mind it will just render whatever is in the viewport, so you might want to turn off the armature to just see the character. So now we can go to View and then Render Animation, and there you go. Also, if you want to turn off the grid, you have to go into Overlay and turn it off there. And then you can render like this. So now for some miscellaneous tips. One of the most useful features in Blender is F3 search. You can search for any option you want by name. So for example, let's search for add cube maybe. And here you can see we can add an empty, that's the shape of the cube. We can add a mesh, or maybe, how about add constraint, or bake something. Also, you can find this option in edit menu search as well. Same thing. And the nice thing is, anywhere in Blender, including here, you can right-click any option, and you can either add a hotkey like this, or you can add it to quick favorites. And let's do that with this as well. And you can access the quick favorites by pressing the hotkey for quick favorites. Now, by default, this is Q, but in the hybrid key map, this is actually on tilde instead. So now in the quick favorites menu, we can choose the two options we just added, which are add an armature, and we can also add a camera. If you change your mind, you can right-click any option and you can remove it from quick favorites. And then if you open it again, it will be gone. You may have noticed when opening scenes that Blender will actually use the layout from that scene as the new layout. And if you don't want the new scene to change your layout, what you want to do is go into Settings over here and then uncheck Load UI. And then when you open the scene, it will use the settings that you're already using. So one more quirk of Blender that you might want to be aware of is that if you select multiple objects and you want to rotate them all at the same time, by default, it does this. It only rotates the bottom one. So, okay, what to do about this? Well, you want to go into the pivot settings and change it from the default medium point to individual origins. And now, if you rotate, it rotates each one individually. Something you may notice if you've changed the view at all is that the camera rotates from the camera focal point, not from whatever you have selected. You can change this by going to Edit Preferences, Navigation, and then enabling Orbit Around Selection. And now it will always rotate around your selected object, which is pretty handy. If you're using a graphics tablet with a pen, you might notice that the object manipulation is not super responsive. There's like a kind of a lag before it actually starts doing anything. You can fix this by going to Edit, Preferences, and then Input, and changing the tablet drag threshold to something more like the mouse. So I prefer setting this to 3. Now, if you go back here, you'll find that it's a lot more responsive. So hopefully this has given you a place to start with getting into Blender, and for further study I recommend these resources. First of all, you want to check out the official Blender YouTube channel. They have a ton of tutorials and great videos. Next, you want to check out Blender Cloud, which has all kinds of tutorials for animation, for modeling, for all sorts of stuff. For rigging and animation, you want to start by looking at the channel of Pierrick Picot. A lot of good stuff on rigging and animation. You also want to have a look at the Rigging Dojo tutorial series on nonlinear motion editing and animation. Also very good is the Lollipop Man channel. A lot of good stuff on animation, some stuff on rigging. Another very good one is the rigging tutorial series by Armin Halak. For general tips and tricks, you should look at Blender Secrets. And if you're interested in visual effects, you should absolutely check out Ian Hubert's channel, which has the lazy tutorials. And finally, where do you find rigs to animate? The Blender Cloud character library has a lot of cool characters. You can find rigs on BlendSwap. Also, there's a bunch of good stuff on Gumroad. And if you're interested in animation, you should also definitely check out Brad Clark's Blender talk, the Blender Rosetta Stone for production artists. And that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope this was useful. You can contact me on Twitter or email, and